Baylor and BYU are going to meet in the Big 12 championship in Arlington next year. Now you know something the experts for some reason don't know. Let's get Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars joining the show. A little Locked On Baylor, Locked On Big 12 crossover. Wanted to talk, Jake, about some of these odds. This Big 12 championship odds that came out this week from Vegas are crazy dumb. Is that about what your first reaction was to this?
Well, my first reaction was, did I get transported back like a year ago this time? Because Utah, well, okay, no offense, but how in the world is Utah a favorite to win the Big 12? Sorry, come on.
You can offend, brother. This is you are allowed to offend Utah. Yeah, that actually is the exact thought I had. I was thinking I was seeing something from January of 2024. Utah, even with Kansas State at plus 25,000 to win the national championship, by the way. That's not just to win the Big 12. Obviously, that would be implied as those top two teams. But those are the Big 12 teams most likely to win the national championship. Now, Kansas State, I was high on going into last year. I still like them going into this year, even though they underachieved a little bit in 2024. Not crazy. But Utah, can you, you know this state better than me, and therefore that team a little bit better than me. We played them in September, so I don't remember as much. But what could they possibly be pointing to?
The fact that they have a really good defense and they're going to lock everybody down. But here's the thing. They had a really good defense. It was the number one defense in the Big 12 by most metrics, and they still finished 5-7, Cam. So
won them 2 Big 12 games.
They're bringing Jason Beck in, a former BYU Cougar himself, to run this offense. He's bringing his quarterback with him.
That's the trick.
Dampier. But okay, no offense, a kid from New Mexico, that's who's going to win the Big 12. I'm hard pressed to think that this person, whoever these odds makers were in Las Vegas, that they didn't take last year's odds, just copy and paste and send it out all of a sudden.
I mean, that's what it feels like. Yeah. And after that, you have some of the Arizona State gets back in there. Arizona State at plus 30,000, and then Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas all on the same plane. Now, Iowa State won 10 games. They went to the Big 12 championship. They bring a lot of their skill guys back. Baylor's bringing a lot of skill guys back after winning 6 games in a row. Where is Kansas coming from? I like Jalen Daniels as much as the next guy, but they go 5-7 last year. It's actually a pretty big disappointment for a team that was supposed to be up in the running. And so that I'm not understanding. But what's crazy, if you haven't put the pieces together yet, once we get past Baylor, Iowa State, and the Kansas Jayhawks, only then do we find the BYU Cougars.
Hey, here's the thing. BYU thrived a year ago on being the underdog. I remember they were a nationally ranked team, Cam, that went to UCF and was a road dog down there in Orlando. I can tell you, BYU players and coaches, they were royally pissed off the fact that they were an underdog as a nationally ranked team against a middling Big 12 team in UCF a year ago. They will take this. This will live on their bulletin board for months, and they will take it to heart because BYU just went 11-2. They absolutely thrashed the vaunted Colorado Buffaloes, and to find themselves, and I know that they lost to Kansas, but the fact that they're behind Kansas in these Big 12 odds, BYU is not going to be happy about this. I can assure you of that.
I just don't get it. And you know this as well, but preseason rankings, they don't mean a ton. You take them with a grain of salt, right? But that said, when you look at any of the preseason rankings of any of the major outlets, it's the Big 12 teams are BYU, usually the first one listed. ESPN had them in the top 10. Yeah.
We have 90% of BYU's roster that went 11-2 this year is coming back next year, Cam.
It's BYU, Arizona State, and then your Kansas States and Iowa States and Baylor are kind of rounding out that either 19 to We're also receiving votes. Utah is not on any part of this. Kansas is not on any part of this. This is so, is it weirdly like a compliment of like, hey, the Big 12 just always throws us a wild card. So throw it at the dartboard. Utah should be the wild card this year.
Okay, Utah can be the wild card all you want, but they were like this big bad team that, remember, their fan base came in last year. We're going to run this league. We're only going to be here for a short time. We're going to the Big Ten. We're going to the SEC. Rah, 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 rah. And they went 5-7. They fell flat on their face. Do they expect Cam Rising to emerge once again and lead them to glory? I don't think so, because his own head coach said he ain't coming back here to play. So I am baffled at this, but in a way, BYU should be thanking everybody, saying, all right, thank you for the chip on our shoulder, because guess what? We are going to use that, and we're going to go out there and stick it to everybody once again next year.
Now, this is an important part of it, right? Because honestly, without the UTs and the OUs in the world anymore, like nobody in this conference really handles prosperity like year in, year out. No one is the alpha, I guess is the term. And obviously UT did not handle it very well the last decade and a half they were in here. But like other than Oklahoma in the late 2010s, like nobody was just like, all right, we won it this year. And guess what? We're going to win it again. Yeah. And we're going to win it again and again and again. And so all these teams can kind of lay claim to, we like being the underdog. BYU, obviously you guys saw it this year. I think back to Baylor's most successful season of recent memory in 2021. Nobody was ranking them before the season. Nobody was giving them any odds.
We just watched a team go from literally worst to first in terms of preseason polls. Arizona State was picked 16th out of 16 teams and won the darn league and went to the college football playoff. This is a topsy-turvy league, and I think it's going to take some time for that proverbial alpha to emerge from the pack, if it ever does, quite honestly, because it may not ultimately do that. But you're right. Your point, I think, is well taken. That Vegas is planning on this being a league that is just going to be volatile, and that's what they're betting on. But Utah, Kansas State as your favorites, it feels like they just took last year's odds and said, hey, let's see if we can sneak this by everybody once again.
That could be the case. Like, I've not ruled that out. That really could be the case. So as we look at these odds then, where would you have BYU? Because I think Baylor and BYU are two teams that very well could be in Arlington in December. So where would you put them on the grand scale of things here?
I would actually have both of them in like the top four. If I had a top four, I would say it's Arizona State, it's BYU, it's Baylor, and then I would actually include also Kansas State in that mix, because I do like what Kansas State returns. Avery Johnson, another year of experience under his belt. Chris Kleiman has shown to be a very capable coach. That would be my top four in this league. And there'd be some other teams on the periphery right there. I think Texas Tech, just by virtue of what they've done on the recruiting trail this offseason. I'd have Utah maybe mid-table, but I think that both Baylor and BYU should have aspirations of being a team that can make a run at Arlington next year and playing at AT&T Stadium, because these are two teams, two of the hottest teams down the stretch of the season. BYU started 9-0. Obviously, BYU and Baylor played an absolute classic down there in Waco. The BYU was lucky to hold on for the victory there, but that really kind of jump-started what Baylor did in the back half of the season. So I look at both the Bears and the Cougars as teams that are saying, no, you may think we're not favorites. No, we absolutely are going to be favorites, and we should be favorites to go to Arlington.
Take that, Vegas. You just sit there and watch Baylor and BYU Arlington Big 12 championship. Book it.
Baptists versus the Mormons. Let's go.
Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like none other. I still remember the great one I got to go to. The energy, the excitement, the connection with your community and your fans, it's unmatched. This year, GameTime makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, GameTime Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I'm using GameTime Picks to go and grab Connor Bedard versus Connor McDavid next week at the United Center in Chicago. It couldn't have been easier. I got some great seats that were a great deal. I got to see which team was shooting twice. I got to see the view from my seats. It was perfect. No surprise fees made it the best. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Very special guest joining Locked On Baylor. It's been far too long, but he's back. He is back, Baylor alum, and now the founder of Acts of the Athletes Sports Agency, working in a bunch of sports around college athletics in the NIL space. Brandon McKinnon. Brandon, what an adventure you've taken on with this new company.
Yeah, dude, it's wild. Yeah, man, I appreciate you having me back on just to talk hoops and life of NIL, college athletics, just everything, bro. I think as is every time I'm on, it's just going to be a lot of directions and just riffing, which hopefully is fun for the listeners. But yeah, it's like a full circle moment. I mean, I like got into college athletics podcasting at Our Daily Bears, RIP. And now it's just like trying to run a Christian faith-based sports agency to spread the gospel through athlete representation, but also be excellent for the athletes that we work with in the NIL space. So it's wild. It's truly wild, but it's been a blast so far.
Yeah. So you kind of went into the mission statement a little bit right there. This is why we've got you on. Baylor guy, knows a ton about Baylor hoops. And this is, I mean, we all want to know more about NIL. It's one of these things that we still, I don't think some colleges know, let alone us, the fans, quite grasp it at whatever the sport may be. And what you've taken is looking for an agency to help out those students with NIL, but with that faith-based aspect to it. I'm sure a lot of Baylor fans are going to love to hear that.
Yeah, man. So that's exactly right. And like, I kind of got the idea for it when I was doing like the sit down series, like player interviews for Our Daily Bears in like 2021, 2022. And you know, I didn't ever air anything on the pods about like NIL or anything, but a lot of those conversations kind of happened just like out of interest for the guys. Like I didn't want that to be on a podcast. That's pretty personal. And I think Baylor does a good job internally, like helping athletes find resources. Like the Waco community's obviously bought into investing in Baylor athletics. The GXG Elite Collective does a really good job. Like the talent on our rosters point to that. But some feedback I heard was that like, you know, guys were signing to agents that were primarily just here to try and make sure they could rep them at the NBA level and then not doing a ton for them on the NIL side. And so, I just was like, man, maybe there's a fit here. And so I literally Googled Christian faith-based NIL agency and nothing existed. And I was like, I guess we're going to run at this. But that was in, like I said, like 2022. And I like kicked the tires in the idea for 2 years, then finally founded the company in March of 2024. And quit my corporate sales job in November of 2024, which was scary, but also fun. And, so been full-time for a few months working with athletes and just trying to spread the gospel through athlete representation, not only working with Christian athletes, but, it's been a blast. So that's a little bit about what we're doing.
And it's been clicking, Brandon. Like it's been on fire. In fact, you just got your first Baylor athlete as well.
Correct. Yeah. So signed our first Baylor athlete. I don't think there's any secret to like the setup of the NIL industry, right? Like when you're thinking about collective donor-led funding in the future, like revenue share, kind of university compensation, that's primarily going to like men's football, men's basketball, and women's basketball, what the NCAA would deem revenue generating sports. However, there's an untapped market for college athlete, like true influencer creators. And so at AOA, we are focused on men's and women's basketball. We're kind of leaving football to the NFL agents. Like they have that covered pretty well. Yeah. And then also what we would call kind of more of the athlete influencer. And so Kai Hayes is a grad student on Baylor's women's soccer team, came from UNC. She's a phenomenal women's soccer player, but also has a really cool presence on social media and some really cool ideas for how she wants to develop as a marketer. And so got connected, signed her, and first Baylor athlete in the door. And we're just here to help her kind of think through brand deals, plugging in with the Waco community in the 2 years that she's here and think about what's next, life after soccer. So yeah, it's a blast.
I find that interesting that that's all kind of in play and nothing against Kai. We know she's a good player, but like, even if you're not necessarily a great player, but you do have that brand online, you could be an influencer. It helps out the school. It helps out them. Like that's kind of a fascinating wrinkle to this for me. I was like, man, why couldn't I just been okay at some sport, but funny,
Yeah. No, I mean,
I had to be good at something first. So
yeah, that's the trouble. And the reason it works is because, and there's a ton of data now that backs it up. And I think it's not surprising when you like look at the data, which is not like a awesome take because data is inherently not surprising. It's like, this is factual.
Sure, yeah.
But
by its definition, sure.
Yeah. By definition, that's what data is. So what the data shows and like why there's benefit for brands and schools and stuff for kind of those athlete influencers is that typically an athlete influencer has like a 10 to 12 times higher engagement rate than your standard social media influencer, right? Like I see my wife, love her to death, but I see her scroll past all of the home influencers, mom influencers, since I last potted, I have a kid now and another on the way, crazy. But I just see my wife scroll through that. But if you think about any athlete you follow, you typically stop and look at their post. And so the engagement rate is much higher. And so brands are seeing a higher ROI, which makes athletes like Kai, who has 3,000 followers, almost 4,000 followers, which is not like an astronomical number, but if her engagement rate's 30%, which it is, a brand knows anytime Kai posts, she's going to get at least 1,000 impressions. And so then the ball starts rolling. That's kind of a quick overview on like why it works, how it works. It's been fun so far to kind of tap in and see where we can help connect athletes with brands that make sense for their like interests.
We love that, man. And you talk about the Waco community getting involved. And I'm not going to lie, I was not the only one, but I think a lot of us were skeptical of what Baylor could do in the NIL space when it got bigger and bigger. Cause it's not a big school. It's a private school. It's in a medium-sized city that doesn't always embrace that they're the hometown of Baylor University. Sure. But that has really come along. I know GXG has been a big part of that as well and getting that up and going and certainly sustainable for Baylor. And you said it earlier, you see it in the product on the field, on the court. Like clearly you can tell from that Baylor's not like, little sisters of the poor when it comes to the NIL space. And it's really something that's improved over the last couple of years. And now I know there's a big event on the horizon for you, for NIL, for colleges in a couple of months, this revenue sharing, which is set to be decided in April. It's going to change how we see all of this. How does that change things for schools like Baylor?
Yeah, no, great question. I don't think anybody knows for sure. So I'm not speaking off of like any fact because the court case is also not finalized. I don't know what Baylor's going to do, but like my assumption, if I were to be like, okay, Baylor, kind of where they are, Power 4 conference, good at football and basketball and a number of women's sports, how does the revenue sharing model help Baylor? And so for folks that aren't familiar with the revenue sharing model, basically what it is the NCAA receives revenue from every school that just for the sake of being in the NCAA, right? The revenue sharing model in the court case in April is saying the NCAA then needs to share 20% of the revenue that they get from each school back to that school. So for easy math, let's say Baylor generates $100 million per year for the NCAA. The NCAA then pays Baylor back $20 million to basically serve as a salary cap to pay athletes. And that will now be legal moving forward. Whether or not you like it, it's probably going to happen. Like I think schools are preparing for it to happen, thinking that it will. I think for Baylor, it's going to be unique because that $20 million is going to go across a ton of major sports. And it's going to be basically create a zero-sum game, right? Like every school is going to get the same amount from the NCAA to where organizations, again, just my opinion, organizations like GXG Elite, collectives, local businesses, donors are still going to be able to like differentiate from like financially and basically help schools operate above the cap and kind of be difference makers. But it's not only going to be about money anymore and about the salary that the player's being paid, because they're going to be taken care of financially via the revenue share. So now it's going to be more about like creative sponsorships, right? So like, what does it look like for, just pull an example, right? Like I know like Kai really loves like yoga. And so like if she wants to partner with a yoga company in Waco, what does it look like for her to do an event with her entire women's soccer team, in exchange for free yoga classes, right? Like I think that's kind of what it looks like. But the opposite side of the coin is schools can opt out of the revenue sharing model. They can say, we're good. We want to keep running it through our collective. No one really knows exactly what it's going to look like on a school by school basis. But I think the next 4 to 5 months of college athletics are going to be probably some of the biggest change we'll see in our lifetime.
Yeah. So like once again, Baylor kind of being on the small side of D1, probably makes it even more tricky, because I know some of these mega collectives like Florida and Tennessee, you know, maybe they're like, yeah, we'll just go with the collective. We'll make more money that way. But that's going to be very interesting.
Yeah,
Brandon,
I just like nerded out about the NIL industry, so I apologize if any listeners was just like screw it and fast forward through that. But that's like the full background on where I think it's going.
Well, see, this is what we need. We need an expert. Like, none of us know. I've tried. I know how to read, but yeah, like I don't. You have a better grasp on it. So this is why we have you here, because we're just catching up to see where Baylor's kind of at NIL right now, and it's all going to change potentially in a couple of months. So,
and I think what's interesting, not like last thing I'll say on the revenue share model, what's going to be interesting is I think it's going to spread talent, because think of a school like a VCU, and it came out, they're like, our salary cap for our basketball team is now $6 million. Men's basketball is their only D1 sport that generates revenue for that school. So whatever revenue they get back from the NCAA, they can dump fully into men's basketball. So I think some of these mid-major, so I think like a
Gonzaga's finally going to do it.
Exactly. So I think that these schools that have one primary sport that generates most of their revenue, that's going to be really interesting to see how they navigate. All right, we're really only pouring money into this one sport, and so is talent now going to be spread differently? Like, I think that's a big reason why St. Bonnie's went out and got Woj as their GM. They kind of saw ahead. They're like, okay, we only have one revenue generating sport, it's men's basketball. What if we get the biggest name in basketball, like reporting globally, to come and run this at his alma mater? How can we attract talent? It's going to be interesting to see.
That's fascinating. Boy, Rick Pitino with just millions and millions to throw at kids. That'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Brandon, I do want your thoughts on this specific Baylor team, and we're actually going to link it back to maybe the start of this agency through this current Baylor sports team, or this Baylor basketball team, I should say. Let's do that next on Locked On Baylor. Brandon McKinnon, Baylor alum, CEO, founder, Acts of the Athletes sports agency.
CEO and founder doesn't carry a lot of weight when there's only, one full-time employee.
They don't know. They will know soon. Know soon. And I do want your take on this Baylor hoops team in a second, because we had you on as like the Baylor basketball expert, and I still think you fit into that category. But we talked about one of the articles you wrote last night, 2 nights ago during the Baylor BYU game, about Rob Wright, when Rob Wright was taking this thing into overtime by himself. Yeah. And what's interesting about that, you wrote about Rob 2.5 years ago. It was September of 22. And it weirdly links back to this agency that you've started.
Yeah. So that was when, the blogging and podcasting days with Our Daily Bears. And that was, shout out if any ODB loyal listeners. ODB, man. That was dope. But yeah, like I just saw, I was just watching Rob's tape, and I was just like, gosh, like this dude gets it. Like you can't teach some of the like identifying angles, like twitchy movement, like almost like diet Shea Gilgeous-Alexander type movement that he has, although a bit undersized. And I was like, I think this dude has a crazy ceiling. And that was obviously before we had VJ. At the time, we only had Jason Asamoah signed, and I was like, Rob. So when Rob verbally committed, he was unranked, and I was like, this kid's going to be nasty. It's when he was still at Newman Gotti. He hadn't gone to Mount Verde yet. So again, I'm not trying to be like, I know crazy ball, but that was a legacy take for me. And so, it's cool to see that come to fruition. And I think Rob is like an ultra talented kid. And I think there's no secret that maybe we're not stoked about the record and the outcome as a fan base right now.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a world where we go on any sort of run to end the year and push for like a top 6 seed in the tournament, it's going to kind of start and end with like the battery of Rob Wright and VJ in the diaper dandy role. So
that certainly seems to be the way it's turned, the last week or two here, where, we obviously hope Jeremy Roach comes back here, but the way that those two have handled the offense has been terrific. They've both been more assertive, although you don't need to tell Rob Wright to be very assertive. He does that mostly on his own. But VJ's really taken the wheel here as well. And they willed them back into that game against BYU the other night. Yeah. Like it could have got ugly when it was 11-13 and VJ and Rob just kept making enough plays, kept them in it. And kept them within striking distance. So you're following this team.
Yeah.
This is not you saying this. This is not you flexing. This is me flexing for you. You know more ball than I do. Can you see this team making a run? It starts Saturday, big game against Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And if they win that, they can get on a roll here. But do they have the dogs in this?
I think like we have the talent. Like the talent is not a question, right? Like you bring in guys in the portal like a Norchad O'Meara and a Jalen Celestine and a Jeremy Roach, and like we retain the talent. If he plays again, like a Langston or a Jaden and a Josh, brought in great freshmen. We have the names. So if you're asking me, do we have the dogs? I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
Can we convince those dogs to play cohesive and collective defense? That's my biggest question. We haven't seen it yet this year. So,
jury's out.
Yeah, the jury's out. And so, I mean, if you look at any national champion or even any team that's made it to the Sweet 16 in the last 5 years, they all are. So, Sweet 16, everyone is top 50 KenPom offense and defense. And then for national championship, it's top 15, 20 or whatever. There's the video circulates every March of the breakdown. And it's these teams fit it, bet on them or whatever. So I'm not super optimistic. I don't know if that's, that's hard to say. But I would love to see us put together some solid defensive stretches because that's the most troubling thing. We can score the basketball. Like King McClure said it 2 nights ago, 2 top 20 offensive teams playing and, in the BYU and Baylor game. However, can we get stops when we need it? Is there a world where we could have ratcheted up the intensity and won the BYU game in overtime if we string together 3 stops, And so you're going to need to do that in the tournament.
It is almost like the way football started this year in a weird way of even when they were 2-4, we were but they look better. They look better than last year. We just hadn't seen it yet. We hadn't seen it come together. And I feel that same way about this team where it's yep, there's time left, but it should be better by now. And it's not. And until we see it 2-3 games in a row and against good teams, maybe that's harsh, but you got to see it against good teams. Then we'll start to talk about it. But
and that BYU environment is truly a top 10 environment in college basketball. I mean, college football too, the fans are really good. And so, and there were 30 NBA scouts there. So you're having guys play tight. I don't know. I'm not as upset about the BYU loss as I am.
I've mellowed
Arizona,
on it.
Yeah, as I was the Arizona loss or whatever. So I think we have the talent to make the run. Do we have enough time to figure out a defensive identity? That's the question.
And that will be pressing. It certainly will be. Brandon, we really appreciate you coming on Locked On Baylor. Before you go, I want you to plug away. How can people follow the journey? We've got recruits that watch and listen to the show. How can they get in touch and how can they follow along with this journey that you've got with Acts of the Athletes?
Yeah, no, thanks, bro. Appreciate you even opening up the ability to do that. So hit us at AOA Sports Agency on Instagram and Twitter. Our website is aoasportsagency.com. You said plug, so I'm plugging.
Plug it, man. Go ahead.
And man, I mean, we're in hyper growth phase. We have some really cool brand partners that are doing agency wide, campaigns and activations with our talent. And we're also trying to help some of our guys figure out where they're going to go play basketball next year. So helping on the collective side too. I mean, really it's just start on Instagram, hit our website. There's a contact us page or DM us. And we're open to having conversations. That's what I'll plug. Man, it's been a cool journey. God's been really cool and faithful. But we're still trying to figure it out and make this thing go and serve athletes well. So
And it is fun to follow, even if you're not an athlete. Truly, Brandon knows ball, but it goes so much beyond ball with this. And it's really inspiring, maybe cheesy, but it's inspiring to see even in this day and age. So it's a ton of fun. So Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to have the squad show later on today, so be sure to like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. Leave a comment down there how smart Brandon is, how ugly I am, all that good stuff. Drop that down in the comments below, how far you think this team can go, what you think's going wrong. Please let me know. Like, subscribe. Find us wherever you find your podcasts as well, and we'll see you later on today on the squad show, which is a part of Locked On